Hey, welcome back to my Prog Rock show, everybody. Today is the day that I see Steve Hackett in concert at the Broome County Forum Theater in Binghamton, New York, as well as getting an exclusive interview with Steve himself. So stick around. Can you believe that the Genesis album Foxtrot is over 50 years old? That's worth celebrating. This will be the fourth time I've seen Steve Hackett in concert, the last time being in September of 2019 in Ithaca, New York. There's going to be a few surprises in this video, so come along for the ride. On my way to the show, I might as well give a brief history of the greater Binghamton area, otherwise known as the Triple Cities. Binghamton has always been able to adapt through the years. Starting out as the second largest producer of cigars in the late 1800s, the area would soon be known for Endicott Johnson or E.J. Shoes. During World War II, IBM was founded employing almost 20,000 people at its peak. Many defense industries were also popping up during this period, one even developing the first flight simulator. As with everything, all good things come to an end. In the early 2000s, IBM would move, but Binghamton would reinvent itself as a college town mostly due to the ever-expanding Binghamton University. The Forum Theater opened its doors in 1919, and oh yeah, Rod Serling of the Twilight Zone fame also grew up here. Let's get to what we came for. I'm here with Steve Hackett.
Hi there.
Steve, first of all, thank you for allowing me to meet you. I really appreciate that.
Pleasure.
And I just had a few quick questions about your career.
Sure.
And I want to start right at 1970.
Yeah.
And talk about your ad in Melody Maker.
Sure.
At the time, you said that the music was stagnant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What about your guitar skills and musical writing skills that's more innovative at that time?
Well, all that was developing at the time when I thought that the music business was transitioning from blues-based bands to something that incorporated other genres. So what was coming was a pan-genre approach. But it did mean that, for guys who started out life thinking they were going to have a career as a blues guitarist and harmonica player, which I did at the beginning, I didn't realize that the blues boom was going to die on me. But in a way, there was an open door because people were starting to experiment more and more. Listening to classical music or jazz didn't have to be a guilty pleasure. It was something that was going to be incorporated into the sounds of many British bands. Certainly, Genesis were one of a number of bands who were, 1 minute sounding like church music, the next a little bit like an orchestra, the next a bit like a rock band, and sacred music and syncopated. So you got that sort of sacred and the profane going side by side, this sort of contradiction thing, and it was a big hodgepodge, big mix of things.
The other question I wanted to ask you too, being in Genesis, and I was wondering, after you left, they changed their sound more pop rock in their solo careers.
Yeah.
You seem to hold the course with prog rock.
Yeah.
Were you kind of the driving force of that sound within the band, or was it kind of more of a collaborative sound?
Well, I think they realized what I was after, and I knew that having seen the band live before I joined them, it was a little bit like a folk rock ensemble that occasionally went loud right at the end as a sort of concession to fans who might have just wandered off, and as they sometimes did. So I realised that the band kind of needed a more explosive or a harder edge, and I realised we needed certain things like mellotron, a light show. I wanted to expand the keyboard arsenal so that Tony's skills could be reflected adequately. So we ended up getting a monophonic synth a year or two later, an RMI piano, because I was interested in I was at least as interested in his sounds as all the sounds that the guitarists were making within the band. So I think I was a motivator in some ways, but I was also a sort of fledgling songwriter, so I couldn't necessarily compete on the level with a team, on the same level with a team that had been working together as a unit in some shape or form since they were 11 years old. So, that was a kind of a difficult nut to crack, to learn to speak Venusian so that you could join in with that. But they knew I was an idealist, and I think we were all good for each other at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tony Stratton Smith, Head of Charisma, was it was the label that Genesis was on. Encouraged you to do your first album. Even I believe you named the album too.
Yes, he did.
Voyage of the Acolyte.
Yes.
Was that music especially for that album, or did you have like music that was built up with Genesis that you kind of released on that album?
Whilst we were touring Landmines Down on Broadway, which was almost 9 months continuously on the road, I had plenty of time to think about what I would potentially do next. Knowing that Peter Gabriel was going to leave the band, it meant that the band's future was in question. So the plan was, I would amass material. It was either going to go into a solo thing or it was going to be a band thing. Various people within the band were going different ways. Phil was going to do some separate stuff. Mike was going to be working with Anthony Phillips, who was my predecessor. There were a number of things going on. Tony was the only person who wasn't doing anything outside the group. Peter had left the group by the end of that, and you're quite right. And I had a dream about Tony Stratton Smith. I think it was last night or the night before. And funnily enough, he was like a sort of giant figure in my thing, and I was putting my hand up to him as he was a sort of giant figure, almost like a parental figure. I think he had a sort of an overview of everyone. So I tried to learn off him as much as possible, and some of that gregariousness rubbed off eventually.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
That's all right.
And thank you for this interview.
Okay.
Again, I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
They say never meet your heroes, but when it comes to prog rock artists, they are the exception. Steve and his wife Jo could not have been kinder and more welcoming. At one point, I even found myself sitting on a couch next to Steve as he and his wife regaled a small group of people with stories of their travels. Steve did sign a few things for me, as I am first and foremost a fan. As for the show itself, the first half consisted of Steve's solo career. And the second half, Foxtrot, was played in its entirety. The encore was Firth of Fifth. And Los Indos was the closer. Once again, the musicianship was second to none. Steve Hackett is such a virtuoso guitarist. He plays with such comfort and ease. After the show, people cheered as the musicians came one by one through the hotel that was across the street. I even got to buy lead singer Nad Sylvan a drink. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.